Waiting for Snow in Havana is a book about my childhood in Cuba. And it was written as a novel. I actually sold it as a novel, but when the editor found out that it wasn't fiction, they made me publish it as an autobiography. And it's told from a child's point of view. It has a child's voice in it. And it just simply tells the story of what happened to me and my family before and after the revolution. And the book ends when I leave for the United States. It has all kinds of messages in it. And I think it's impossible to write any book about Cuba that doesn't have a political message. As a matter of fact, I have one sentence in there. I have the reader, I asked the reader to do certain mental exercises, to imagine certain things. And it's a list for every reader. Then I have at the very end, I have a message for Cuban readers only. Imagine having memories that have nothing to do with Batista or Fidel, because it's impossible. It's been too long. I was born in 1950. Batista came to power in 52. I'm now 56 years old. If I had stayed in Cuba, I would have never voted in an election. That's all that, people there have. And even more than that, anyone who is now 70 or so still wouldn't have voted in an election. So any narrative that takes place in Cuba is going to have politics. It has to. My conclusion about the Cuban Revolution is this is a terrible disaster. It's a terrible disaster that caused a lot of suffering for no good end. And the main part of the message that gets across is that families should not be separated by politics. Because I came to the United States by myself. My parents sent me here by myself. And it took my mother 3.5 years to join up with me. And my father was never allowed to leave, and I never saw him again. So multiply this by hundreds of thousands, even millions. And my message, if there is a single message in the book, is that children know that they want to be free. Children know that they want to be respected and have autonomy. Every child wants autonomy. It's a basic human condition. If there's anything that's basically human, cultures change and so on, but the very idea that there are certain things that are sacred, like family. What child wants to be taken away from his family? There are certain things you just should not do. Change. Something has to change because the people are now near starvation level. No matter what this man at the Ziegler, I think his name, at the United Nations this week said that Cuba's a model for the world of feeding its people. Well, everybody's near starvation level. Something has to change. There's no new building. The population has doubled since the revolution, but building hasn't kept pace, which means that there's not enough housing. Something has to change. And I'm hoping it will change through foreign investments. Like the Spanish have a lot invested in Cuba. The Spanish business community in Spain and the Spanish government could do more to loosen things up, because in the end, if things loosen up, all the foreign investors will end up making more money, which is why they're there. I don't think the foreign investors are there for profit. I don't think they're there for ideology. I think they're there for profit. If they can somehow convince the military junta that now runs the place that there's more money for them too, if things change, then maybe. Because I think the ideology there is pretty thin. The ideology has always been thin. It's been a personality thing with Fidel Castro, more than an ideology thing. I think that he is very similar to Francisco Franco in many ways, who kept everything under control, and it didn't take very long after Franco was gone for things to loosen up. Not very long. Well, I was in Madrid in 1980 at the book fair in Parque del Retiro, right? And I saw several booths closed down because they had illegal books, and this was 5 years after Franco. Nothing will change overnight in Cuba either. I hope so. I hope so. But I think it could go either way. It could also be a very violent transition if things spin out of control. But I take comfort in knowing that in Eastern Europe, it was fairly peaceful, except for where? Except for Yugoslavia. But there you have, ethnic differences and so on. Cuba doesn't have that. So I'm hoping it'll be more the Eastern European model than the Balkan model. I'm a specialist in 16th and 17th century history in almost all of Western Europe. I started my career doing Protestant Reformation in Northern Europe. Now I'm working on Spanish and Italian Catholicism. And been teaching at Yale for 11 years. Before that, I taught at the University of Virginia for 15 years. And I'm working on 3 different projects right now. I just signed a contract to do a book on the concept of eternity, from early Christian times to the present. So I'm all over the place. From Madrid to Purgatory is the study of attitudes towards death and the afterlife in 16th century Spain. And it deals with various things, but what I did is I studied 3 models. The 2 models that are the official elite models of the good death. The death of the saint. I studied Saint Teresa of Avila, her death. The death of the king, the death of Philip II. But then I have a 3rd part where I sort of try to get to death on the street. And I researched over 1,000 wills from Madrid from the 16th century. And you ended up using about 600 for my data, in which I tracked what people requested in their wills as far as funerals and masses for the dead and so on and so forth. And my conclusion is, well, it was a discovery that as the economy in Spain in the 16th century went through inflation because of all the gold and silver from the New World, so did requests for masses, and so did the price of masses. And the difference between Madrid in 1520 and Madrid in 1590 is astronomical, the number of masses that people requested. And how they used the model, they actually did try to follow the models of the king and the saint. And there is a relationship between elite religion and popular religion, and that it's not because the elites tell the people what to do, but it's a two-way shared relationship. Spanish were very comfortable with death in the 16th century, much more so than in the present, and much more so, I think, than many other Europeans at the time. I actually showed an economist at Princeton my figures about how much money the Spanish were spending on masses. Because, what happens when you spend on masses? Where does that go? It means, really, what you're doing is you're creating more priests, because you need the priests to say the masses, right? And the masses are funded through real estate. So, by 1650, in Cuenca, for instance, about 50% of the real estate was owned by the church. So I showed all this to an economist, and he said, his only answer, imagine what else they could have done with that money. So there's something to the fact that the Spanish invested so heavily in the afterlife that, and it's not the only reason that, that they ran into trouble in the 17th and 18th century, but it's certainly a contributing factor. The king himself, Philip II, spent an entire year's worth of treasure from the New World, an entire year, just to build the Escorial. And then he spent probably another half a year, maybe a whole year, on having masses said for himself. He asked for 30,000 masses to be said within the first month after his death at monasteries, Franciscan monasteries all over Spain. And he paid for that, he paid them. So